In a world where understanding oneself has become an elusive quest, the Enneagram emerges as a captivating tool of self-discovery. A symbol shrouded in mystery, this ancient system of personality typing invites individuals to explore the intricate layers of their inner psyche. Like a mirror reflecting the complexity of human nature, the Enneagram offers 9 distinct archetypes, each representing a unique lens through which we view ourselves and interact with the world. Today, we will be unraveling the tapestry of motivations, fears, and desires with Dr. Beatrice Chestnut, one of the world's top Enneagram experts on our journey of self-discovery and movement toward better than yesterday. Welcome to the Catalyst 360 podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brad Cooper of Catalyst Coaching 360, and Dr. Chestnut is one of the most authoritative voices and thought leaders in the modern Enneagram movement and author of multiple books on the subject, several of which we have in our home library, and we'll include links to all of those in the podcast description. She is a licensed psychotherapist, coach, and business consultant, and has been studying and working with the Enneagram for almost 30 years. As you'll pick up from our discussion, she is also committed to walking the talk personally, using the Enneagram as a tool for her own lifelong inner work. Speaking of unique journeys, if you're an employer, EAP, or wellness service provider, and you're looking for ways to support and enhance the unique physical and mental health needs of employees, Catalyst Coaching 360 might be exactly what you've been seeking, offering best-in-class coaching you can integrate into any program or platform. Details on the website, catalystcoaching360.com, or reach out to us anytime. Results at catalystcoaching360.com. And for those who are thinking about pursuing the MBHWC approved health and wellness coach certification, our final cohort of 2023 launched a few weeks ago, but you can lock in your spot for the early 2024 and get started now on the on-demand coursework. All the details on our Institute site, catalystcoachinginstitute.com, or touch base with any questions you've got with that same email, results at catalystcoaching360.com anytime. And now, it's time to tap into the power and the guidance of the Enneagram with Dr. Beatrice Chestnut on the latest episode of the Catalyst 360 podcast. Let's start with the basics. Now, we had Ian Morgan Cron on about 6 months ago, and he gave us a good groundwork, and so we're going to get into more details today. But for those who may have not heard that episode yet, can you just give us a little overview of what is this thing I keep hearing about called the Enneagram?
Sure. So the Enneagram, it's many things. It's a 9-pointed star inscribed in a circle. It's a symbol. Among other things, it is the framework for a personality typology of 9 types, but there are many other aspects to it, aside or kind of other dimensions as part of this 9-type typology. But it's a very powerful personal development tool, personal and professional development tool, because it provides extremely accurate and deep and very substantive descriptions of these 9 personality types, which essentially describe personality or ego. And that is the I that we have identified with, that the personality that we think to be who we are, but that through the Enneagram, we actually learn we are not that. That's just something we've identified with to kind of make our way in the world, to function in the world of humans. But that when we learn about our Enneagram type, when we learn about our personality, we actually can go much beyond it. It sort of opens the door to really growing and developing and manifesting more of our higher potentials, our deeper potentials, because it helps us see what we have identified with that actually is something that helped us get along in childhood and survive to adulthood. But by the time we're adults, it actually holds us back. It's limiting because it is based on sort of old and familiar defensive patterns and habits. And so when we see how we're kind of really, driven more by these habitual patterns than we may think we are, we can then make a study of them. We can start seeing them in action. And by seeing them, we can create more space for more conscious choices. Like, do I always want to be doing this thing the way I do it? Or maybe I want to do something differently, but I haven't really felt like I had the choice to, because it was just so habitual and deeply ingrained. Yeah. Exactly. I've thought it was who I am, but it's actually just how I operate in the world.
So it's identifying our patterns, tendencies, things we've brought from childhood or family of origin or whatever it might be, roles we've played, tuning into those and then building off of them, realizing maybe we're stuck in that one. Would that be the right word? I'm not sure I'm saying that right.
Yeah, I think that's a good word to use. I think sometimes we don't realize we're stuck. But when we really start paying attention and when we really start saying, like, I notice that I do this thing all the time. And it's not really serving me, but it's still my go-to. It's almost a kind of programming, an inner programming. But when we start really seeing it, when it's highlighted for us by the Enneagram type descriptions, then we can sort of recognize, wow, this is just an automatic habitual pattern that's kind of controlling me, that I to some degree am stuck in. But by focusing on it and even identifying it, I'm already starting to be unstuck because I've identified that this may be an issue for me. This may be something that isn't so good for me, but that I still do because it's just been something I've always done.
Without getting too philosophically deep here, would it be a process or an opportunity to move back to free will? If we're so automated in our responses and our reactions and the roles that we play and the roles that we choose, and then all of a sudden we realize that, we tune into that, we put a new set of glasses on and we say, well, we have all these other options. Maybe today or in this moment, this critical moment, I'll choose something different. Is there anything there?
Yeah. In fact, I think that's a good question because I think what happens with us is we think we're exercising free will, but we aren't really in a certain way. We're kind of just doing what our programming is driving us to do. And if we really want to sort of be free in sort of a larger sense, then yes, we need to look at these habits and patterns that are really constraining us in ways that we don't always recognize. And then once we do that, then I think free will becomes more of a reality.
Well, it's such a fun process for folks that have not had an opportunity to dive into this yet. Please do. And we'll have some links to some resources that Dr. Chestnut has available. But I mean, our family has done it. Our kids are all married and we all sat around and I think you'll get a kick out of this. Our kids kind of sat back on the couch and one of them said, okay, so basically Danielle married her father, Ashley married herself, and Josh married his sister. And we kind of looked around and went, yep, that's pretty much it. So
interesting.
So super helpful in families and just understanding that. But also we're going to get into the leadership roles and some of the things you've written around your 9 Types of Leadership book that I've got sitting here and those things. But so we'll come back to that. But beyond the 9 types, you've done so much work on the subtypes. And I think a lot of folks maybe aren't familiar with those. Could you explain that extra level? And again, we don't want to overwhelm folks, but why is it important and how can people determine not just their type, but that next layer?
That's a great question because as I mentioned, the Enneagram is in a very basic way a 9 type typology. However, there's more dimensions to it that add even more depth and bring even more information should we choose to learn more and spend a little more time on it. The Enneagram is based on 3s. It's actually based in ancient wisdom. And it's based on the idea that we have 3 centers of intelligence. Actually, that's kind of it's sort of a three type typology in that sense. The idea that we all have a head center that thinks, a heart center of intelligence that's more about emotion and empathy and relating to others, and a body center that's more about kinesthetic or instinctual knowing, a kind of gut intelligence, and that we all have all 3, but one of the ways we're kind of essentially out of balance when we're identified with our personality is we come more from one than the other 2. So there are 3 types that are more based in the head, 3 types more based in the heart, and 3 types more based in the body center, meaning they overuse that center and overuse the other 2. So there are these 9 types. And then there's another, I like to say it this way, there's another breakdown into 3. So it's like it's a 3-step process, So we have these 3 centers of intelligence. I'm a 2 in the Enneagram system. So I'm a heart-based type. 2, 3, and 4 are heart-based types. And so I can learn a lot about myself knowing that I'm a heart type, and even more about myself knowing that I'm a type 2 and reading all that it tells me about type 2. But then there's another breakdown into 3, and that's based on the instincts or the instinctual level of our personality. By definition, we humans are animals, and the instinctive part of us is to some degree the biological drives in us, the biological survival drives. So each type, each person, everybody has 3 basic instincts according to the Enneagram model that we kind of use to navigate the world, especially from the point of view of kind of getting our survival needs met. So there's a self-preservation instinct, there's a social instinct, and there's a one-to-one instinct. We call it one-to-one in business, but in more personal growth settings, we might call it sexual. So we each have all 3, but again, in each case, we tend to one tends to dominate our experience. One takes up more real estate in our operations. So for instance, I'm self-preservation dominant. So there are three versions of each of the 9 types based on which one of these 3 instincts is dominant in your experience. So this yields what we call an instinctual subtype. So there are actually 27 types in the Enneagram system. And if you learn the 27, it's even better because you get more nuance, more specificity. So there are many ways that I am like the other 2s, the social 2 and the one-to-one 2. But there are also ways that I have sort of differentiated characteristics if you compare me to a 2 that has a social dominant instinct or a one-to-one dominant instinct. So that's the idea there, is that the subtype refers to a kind of deeper level of even more automatic functioning that has to do with kind of a combination of what drives us emotionally and what drives us instinctually when we're identified with our personality.
So if someone's in a work setting where they've really dipped their toes in or maybe even a whole foot on this, and folks have shared, okay, I'm a 4 and I'm a 7 and I'm a 9 and I'm a 6, et cetera. And they're looking at someone who has the same number as them and they're going, wait, there is no way. That's where we're not at all like, how can she possibly be a 7 when I'm a 7 or a 6
Yes.
when I'm so that would be the subtypes then would be the big differentiator. Is that where they would go next to understand that a little bit more?
Yes, I think that's really right. I think when you see someone of your same type, but there are a lot of differences that may not make sense, it's often that you have a different subtype because different subtypes can create pretty big differences, even certain things that are opposite. And one reason it's really good to know your subtype is because the different subtypes have different growth paths. So you can be a 7, a self-preservation 7, and have a completely different growth priority than a social 7, because there are certain things about you that are very different, even opposite, even though you share some sort of more higher level characteristics in common.
Is conflict more common among certain pairs? Like, do you consistently see this number and this number tend to be at odds, or is it based on the diagram where the opposite sides are more so, or is it oftentimes the same type but the different subtype tend to have more? Are there any of those types of patterns, or is it completely unique to the setting, the person, the history, the background, et cetera?
Yeah, I think it really depends a lot on aspects that are in addition to type, right? So I think if you look at just the types, if you look at all the pairs of types, there's certain ways that each pair of types will get along, things that they kind of like about each other, and then certain ways that they may be at odds, that they just have sort of natural oppositions. However, what plays a huge role is level of awareness. So how aware are you of your patterns and habits, or how much do you have a total lack of awareness and you're just kind of doing what you do without a lot of ability to self-reflect or self-observe, as we say. And that's a big differentiator. So if, for instance, people sometimes say, like, I'm this type. Who's my perfect, couple?
Yeah.
Who should I be in a relationship with? And you really can't answer that in terms of type, because it really depends on, how conscious is that person? So that makes a lot of difference. And like you said, I think sometimes what goes into what is someone's level of awareness is history, background. Have they done psychotherapy or not? Have they had things in their life that have been difficult, that in terms of overcoming them, they've needed to delve more deeply into their experience in order to work through things. What culture do they come from? There are some cultures that maybe don't discourage self-development, some cultures that encourage it, subcultures even within one culture. So I think it depends on that kind of thing a lot when we talk about sort of conflict or what types get along well with others.
And this is simplifying it too much, but I'll just throw it out there. So is respect or appreciation, does that play a big role too? Like Suzanne and I are very different, both in temperament, and she's a 9, I'm a 3 in terms of the Enneagram. And yet, and maybe she wouldn't say this, but we've had 31 great years of marriage. Like, we've run this business together. So it's really worked well, but we're not trying to make each other be something we're not. And there's this relationship, this love, this respect. Is that a big part of it? Obviously different for a marriage than it would be in a coworker setting or a friend, but I don't know. Is that a piece of it, of saying you're different and I love you, and that I'm I always go back to Rocky and Adrian, and people are like, why are you dating Adrian? This doesn't make sense. You two are so different. And he says, Adrian got gaps, I got gaps. Together, no gaps. And I've always said that about Susanna and myself, is we are so different in a wonderful way. But is that part of it? Is the respect, the love, the appreciation, whatever word you want to use, is that a key element, or does that just happen to be the way we've approached it?
Oh, yeah. I think that's a big part of what makes relationships work. I think before we know something like the Enneagram, I think what happens in relationships is we just, without realizing it, assume that everybody sees the world the way we do. Right now, when you're in a long-term marriage, yes, even if you don't have the Enneagram, you, of course, at some point run into the fact that your partner doesn't see the world the way you do. However, what the Enneagram helps us recognize is that other people have these completely other perspectives. They have different traits and different patterns. And as you say, I think when we can see that, it creates more empathy and more respect and more acceptance. And I think that when we can accept others as they are, as you said, and not try to make them into who we are, that helps enormously in relating, because we understand we need to be open to who the other person is and not project our expectations on them. And I think that people often learn that in relationships as they go, if they care about each other. And I think the Enneagram adds clarity, and it helps that each person's ability to say, oh, this is what that person's like. It's not like what I'm like, but I can see it and understand it and respect it. And it's sort of like, I understand this person's baseline. I think we also need to leave people room for growth, right? Because the interesting thing about being a 3 and a 9 is that you can grow through appreciating each other's qualities that you don't have. That's you've got a line between you on the Enneagram diagram, and there's a way that it helps her to be a little more like you, and it helps you to be a little more like her.
No doubt.
And even though you're not going to turn into each other, and it's not about that, it's like not only accepting and respecting each other's ways of being, but also being open to being influenced by each other in positive ways.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's stay at the work topic for a minute. Stress is such a big topic. We spend so much of our physical time and emotional energy getting our work done, interacting with people at work. Whether we're talking about leaders, coworkers, or even health and wellness coaches that are working with these folks, it's impacting all of us. How can the Enneagram help us help those around us in a work setting when it comes to stress and overload?
That's a really good question. And you're right. It's really, really important these days. I think I think when we're under stress, in some ways, we, without realizing it, kind of double down on our personality patterns.
Yes.
It's like we have less flexibility. We have less room to choose to do something in a more creative way, in a way that actually may serve the situation a little better or serve us a little better. It's like we just go back to those go-to patterns, to that programming, because under stress, it's like we don't feel, sometimes it's just about survival or getting through the next hour or getting through the day. And so I think the Enneagram, when we understand those patterns, even if we're really under stress, we can understand how we operate under stress. And of course, the Enneagram has embedded in the symbol has arrow line movements. And when we go to stress, we can not only act out sort of the most basic patterns of our own type, the sort of things that are kind of most deeply ingrained, but we can also act like these two other types, depending on the situation. So it also helps us get insight into, like me as a 2, my type is connected to 4 and 8 on these inner diagram lines. And sometimes I notice I can really act more like the sort of the low side of 4, and we kind of go to our low side. I always say in the Enneagram, there's an upside and a downside to everything, and there's a downside to our type. And when we're less conscious and more stressed, we tend to act out the lower side or the less conscious side of our type, as well as potentially these 2 other types that we're connected to, because they act sort of like release valves. And we can I can act like a 4 or I can act like an 8. And again, not in the best way. So there may be 3 different ways that I'm acting in ways that actually make things more difficult when I'm in stress. So I think the Enneagram helps us recognize that when we're at our most stressed, even if it feels impossible, we can actually slow down a little bit and take a breath or take a pause and just sort of step back and say, okay, what's going on for me right now? Almost use it as a check-in. And how can I see that I'm acting in a way that's actually making my stress worse, when there might be other choices or other ways of acting or reacting. And again, when we're under stress, we tend to react rather than respond. Right. Responding would be a more conscious choice. Reacting would be just that coming from the reptilian brain, the instinct and the emotions that just sort of make us do what we normally do. I think it helps us see that we can actually slow down, take a breath, and really sort of see, what am I doing right now? How am I reacting, and how can I do it differently?
So even if your organization has not engaged with the Enneagram, an individual who taps into this, they can see themselves both reducing their own stress and increasing their effectiveness, even, don't want to say it in a vacuum because it's never a vacuum, but even if you're the only one utilizing it, there are significant benefits, it sounds like.
Definitely. And I've worked with a lot of leaders in companies that haven't yet brought it in or haven't brought it in. And they just sort of recognizing what their own patterns are helps enormously. And the idea that other people have other patterns, and even if they don't know what those are, they can recognize what's happening in themselves. They can understand when their patterns are playing out and have a greater ability to pivot, greater ability to be flexible, greater ability to sort of recognize when they're getting triggered in the moment and what that means and how they're likely to react and what that's going to lead to, and sort of take a step back a little bit and say, okay, even though I'm under stress, I need to give myself a lot of compassion and a lot of room to be human. But at the same time, I can sort of see, okay, this is my general tendency. This is how I get myself in trouble when I'm stressed. And this is how I can sort of relax and take a step back and make a different choice, or just wait until I'm a little bit more resourced to interact with in this situation. Now,
we've utilized this extensively because Suzanne has been so engaged in the training process. So all of our coaches at Catalyst Coaching 360 who wanted to have utilized this tool had access to their report, all the things that, and again, we'll provide a link to your resources for those, because amazing, so helpful. Is there, I'm not an HR expert, and that's going to come out in this question. Is there a way to at least voluntarily pull something like the Enneagram into an annual review process or a biannual review? It seems like it would be so valuable if you're my boss and I'm coming up for my performance review. If you gave me the opportunity to utilize this, and then both of us reviewed it and built my goals and my areas for growth based on that, it seems like it would be 10, 50, 100 times more valuable than you just sitting back going, well, Brad, from the 42 minutes that I've interacted with you the last quarter, I think this is the area that you, I don't know. Are you seeing that? Because you're consulting in a lot of companies with that potential. So I'm just curious if that is an option, if it's not so much, Brad.
Yeah, I think it's tricky. I think you mentioned something really important, which is I think if it's made voluntary,
Yeah. Who wants
I think
to?
that helps, because anytime you have hierarchy and someone's being reviewed by someone else, there can also always be a little bit of like, okay, wait a minute, what is this thing and how is it being used? Right. But I think if you explain it in a very neutral way, when you really reinforce the idea that it's not being used like to pigeonhole people, right, because of course that's a big thing that people are understandably worried about. Sure. Like, is this putting me in a box? Or pigeonholing me and making me more limited. Right. I think if you present it in the right way, I think if you say, the companies I've worked with, the leaders often say something along the lines of, we're offering you the Enneagram as a tool for self-development. The Enneagram's not mandatory, but self-development is. And we think this is a powerful tool that can really help you. And this is how it can help you. And here's the key: when leaders are able to say, this is how it's helped me, then I think they can model for others. Then it's not like this top down, I'm giving you this so I can analyze you more. It's more like, I'm using this as your leader and it's helped me in these ways to develop myself. Here's what I think it can do for you. And we offer it to you so that we can be even more precise in helping you know how to excel or know how to succeed in different ways and what that means for you. Then I think it really depends a lot on how you present it. Yeah. And I think when leaders are including themselves in the self-development process, it's very inspiring for people.
Everything you say is mimicking what we've learned in the health and wellness world. We've been doing this for 17 years. And the same thing, when the CEO doesn't say, I've got it all figured out, but rather, here's where I'm struggling with my own fill in the blank: stress, sleep, exercise, nutrition, whatever it might be. So yeah, I love how you describe that. Could you share an example of someone anonymously who was stressed, unhappy at work, and how knowing their type and integrating the Enneagram tools, the Enneagram system, impacted their work? Just so folks can see, here's how it played out with this one situation. I think that might be super interesting to folks.
Sure. Yeah. So I've worked with a lot of leaders with the Enneagram, and to give you an example, and this can maybe go along with my own type. I've worked with many twos, and I'm a two myself. And I think sometimes what happens with twos is they get stuck in sort of doing too much for others and not voicing enough their own needs. They can get, more stressed and sort of take on more and more and more and not state what they need and not sort of put that in the picture. They can have a trouble saying no. When I worked with two leaders, and I'm thinking of one in particular, one of the first things she said is, can you help? One of my big goals is to learn to say no and to make better boundaries. And then sort of having almost as a mantra, like, what do I need in this situation? Because of course it doesn't work to just always be sort of wanting to, take on more work or do other people's stuff because it's easier than sort of naming what you need to do. And also learning to be more direct. and actually integrating a little bit of the healthy side of type 8 and type 4. And I mentioned the aeroline movements earlier. They can be stress movements where we act out the low sides of those types, but we can also utilize those types to add more tools to our toolkit. So sometimes, for instance, and I'm thinking of a particular leader, she's not as direct or as assertive as she might be, because again, there's a lot of worrying. Do people like me? Am I pleasing everybody? And so sometimes that works against saying what you need and just being direct and assertive, especially if you're the expert and you know more than other people in the room, which the person I'm thinking of often does. I think then there's a way that it can say, okay, here's what I need to do. It's very clear that I need to be more assertive, that I need to worry less if people are liking me or approving of me, and take a little bit more risk in just saying what I think is true. And again, you can take inspiration from 8s who tend to be very direct and very assertive and very much comfortable with wielding strength and power. And that can be an inspiration for a 2 on a growth path, especially a 2 leader, especially in certain settings, corporate settings where maybe, it's a woman leader with a lot of men in the room, and, there's a tendency for certain things to play out. Sure. That way. And so recognizing, okay, even though it may not be my natural comfort zone to be assertive and really push my idea here, I need to really do that. And then what happens is the person does that and they become more successful. And even though it's hard and kind of scary at first, they move up and they get more respect, and people see them as both someone who has good people skills, but also someone who can, make a point very clearly and speak up and say what's necessary and voice what's needed, not only by others, but also from her point of view.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to try this. Could you briefly go through the 9 numbers and just give us the quick version of strengths or superpowers, I think you call it, and maybe a blind spot or two? So just enough for folks to go, ooh, that kind of sounds like me, or, ooh, I didn't realize I had that blind spot, or whatever it might be. You think we can go through that without taking the rest of your day?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah. What number would you like to start with?
Let's just go 1 and work our way up. How's that sound?
Okay. So
actually, you know what? Susanna always says 9s end up last. Why don't we start with 9s and work our way down?
Sounds good. So type 9s, their big strength, they're sometimes, and normally, like in my books, I don't use the names of the types, the labels, because I think sometimes they hold people back from understanding all the depth and complexity. However, I'll use as a shorthand, I'll use the labels here, the names, because I think that will help people get it more quickly. So 9s are sometimes called the mediator or the peacemaker. And what they're really good at, their big strength is tuning into what's going on around them in the environment. And this might be other people or just a sense of, I have a good friend who's a 9 who says, I can sense if there are disruptions in the force. Yeah, totally. So really, what do people need? They're truly helpful. They tend to be truly humble and modest. They don't bring a lot of ego to the table when they're leaders. And so they tend to be very caring, supportive, helpful, easy to get along with, because they tend to be very adaptable and flexible. Now, the downside of that, which is more of a blind spot, is that because they tune so much into other people or the group and what's going to help everybody get along better and harmonize in a way and avoid conflict, they can avoid being in touch with themselves in terms of things that might lead to conflict, right? So if you want to avoid conflict and harmonize, you're going to be motivated not to be in touch with your own anger or your own strong opinions. And so because of that, they tend to not always know what they want or what their own agenda is. And then they go along with others, but that doesn't always end well because they're not including themselves.
Right. Okay. 8.
8 is Eights are we sometimes call them the boss or the challenger. Eights have a big energy really naturally, even if they're small people. And their big strengths are being strong in a way. I sometimes say the eight superpower is superpower. They are they tend to go to high levels in especially American corporate settings because they focus on the big picture, but they're also good at meeting big challenges with strength and determination and a lot of confidence. Now, the interesting thing is their blind spot is vulnerability. So it's a little bit like they overcompensate by being strong and direct and powerful and assertive, but they're compensating for a lack of awareness of vulnerability. So sometimes they can overdo it. They can be too domineering. They can be too strong. They're too forceful. They can intimidate people without realizing it because they may not realizing that to the extent they're not in touch with their vulnerable feelings, like being hurt or pain or sadness, they can overdo their strength and therefore get out of balance. And so it helps them to recognize their blind spots around vulnerable feelings.
Okay. Sevens?
Sevens are, now we just gone from body types to head types. So sevens are a head type. They're very good at staying positive. So when people say it helps to be positive and have a positive vision, that's very seven. It comes very easily to sevens. They tend to be future oriented, very creative, innovative thinkers. They're mental types who make a lot of quick associations and are mentally flexible. So they tend to be good at keeping the mood up in organizations and wanting everyone to be happy and be getting what they need, but also they're good at seeing the positives and helping people see the positives. Now, the blind spot is, as you might suspect, sometimes they don't want to look at the negatives. And they don't realize that when they're focusing on what's positive and fun and pleasurable, they're really acting on a need for freedom to be able to feel whatever they want to feel, experience whatever they want to experience, which is connected to a blind spot around pain. Sevens don't want to, they fear being caught in a negative emotion, and they fear that if they allow themselves to feel a negative emotion, a difficult emotion, that they will never, it'll last forever. So they try to mentally control what happens to them, what they experience, so as not to be open to all the emotions that life might bring. But of course, that means sometimes they have a hard time being present and really experiencing what's happening in the moment, which is really the only moment we can experience.
Yeah. Okay. 3 down, 6 to go. And we're on 6.
6. So 6 is what we sometimes call the core fear type. But they have a blind spot around fear often. Sixes are very good at analysis and problem solving. They're very good at analyzing a situation and seeing what might go wrong ahead of time. So forecasting potential problems and preparing so they can prepare for them before they happen. So you want a 6 on your team if you're wanting plans that work, because in practice, when executed, because the 6 is going to be able to look ahead a few steps and say, well, this might happen or that might happen. So we need to create these contingency plans in case the worst happens. And they can tend to think in terms of worst case scenarios. But their blind spots are sometimes that they are driven by fear. So a lot of 6s say they didn't realize how much they were driven by fear until they encounter the Enneagram. And the Enneagram helps them see that what they were calling problem solving or being prepared or being perfectionistic is really driven by fear. So they need to get in touch with their fear so that they can see how it's driving them and be more conscious and not just make decisions that come from fear, but that are coming from a broader perspective than that.
Let's pause on this one for a moment, because I'm going to personalize this with Brad at the moment. As you're talking about this, is there any family of origin involved with your Enneagram? I'm just thinking, I was around a lot of people growing up who I think were probably 6s, very good at problem solving, forecasting problems, seeing that worst case scenario, even joked about that. And Suzanne and I have realized recently, one of my phrases is, we'll figure it out. Like, we'll be fine. We'll figure it out. But you can only say that when someone else is often figuring it out. So I just wonder, not necessarily specific to me, but in general, is there an overlap between if you're around a lot of this group that often results in you being in I don't know. Is there anything there?
Well, I think when you're around a lot of so I believe that Enneagram type is with us from childhood, from birth. So we're born with our type. However, how our type gets expressed, how things play out, have a lot to do with our early environment and who's in our family and our experience and any traumas we go through. So, of course, environment and our lives have a big impact on how our personality gets expressed. But in terms of what type we are, I believe that's with us from birth. So yeah, and I think sometimes we adapt the way our Enneagram type gets expressed, our personality gets expressed because of what we experienced in childhood. So you may either have more 6 in you than the average 3, or you may react against a kind of 6 thing, or you may have created ways of operating in the world that are designed as a 3 to get along with 6s.
Got it. Okay, thanks. Number 5. What do we got on the 5s?
So 5s are also the third of the head types, and 5 is the type that is probably the most introverted of all types. It's a type that kind of, in the face of early experience of maybe not getting what they need or being intruded upon or neglected, they go into their heads. So they're very mental. They automatically disconnect from emotions. And so their big strength is that they're very good at research, at learning is a big priority. They're often knowledge experts in organizations. They like learning. They love observing and watching what's happening and studying and accumulating knowledge. It's a little bit like the idea knowledge is power. However, the blind spots are the ways that they can disconnect from people and from their own emotions. Because they're so comfortable in their mental functioning, the messy world of emotions feels threatening. And it feels mostly like it will deplete all their energy. So they have also a sense of scarcity when it comes to inner resources, like they need to kind of save their energy for themselves and hoard it a bit. And so they can, without realizing it, disconnect, not share themselves, not be so connected to their own emotions. They may think they're feeling something, but they're really thinking about a feeling, and not have ways of connecting with others.
I love that. You're only thinking about feeling. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. That is classic. I'm going to remember that one. All right. The 4s.
The 4s. So now we're in the heart triad. The 4s probably just went from the least emotional type, the type with least access to emotion, which is type 5, to the type that is probably the most in their emotions. Type 4s are types that focus very much on their own inner experience, especially of what's going on emotionally inside, what they're thinking and feeling. Some of the types are self-referencing, as we call it. And so 4s tend to be very good at sort of knowing what's going on emotionally in the environment. So they can often feel that emotional elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. And this makes them good, like in organizations or families, as the person who's sort of raising the issue no one wants to talk about. Now, sometimes that doesn't make them popular, much to their detriment, but they are very good. They're like in a relationship, they're the one that raises like, hey, we need to talk about this, that uncomfortable truth that people need to face in order to grow and really see what's happening in the full picture. They also tend to be very creative, very idealistic, and very good at self-expression. Like they tend to have an aesthetic sensibility. Sometimes they get pigeonholed as artists. Not all 4s are artists, but they tend to have kind of a creative approach to life, generally, although it doesn't mean they're always artistic or creative explicitly. I would say their blind spot tends to be that they don't always realize the impact of being too much in their emotions. They can sometimes have they can sometimes believe they are their emotions and sort of overemphasize emotional expression. They also often don't own the degree to which they compare themselves to others. So they have what we call a comparing mind. They're always comparing, am I better or less than, in their mind. And sometimes they don't recognize to the degree to which that drives them and may lead them to have kind of a excessively like see themselves as less than or more than in a way that, distances themselves from other people.
Interesting. All right. On to the threes.
So threes, their big strength is that they, again, their personality is very good at setting goals and reaching them. Now, America is a three country. So threes have both advantages and disadvantages if they live in the US. One of the advantages is that their personality programming kind of aligns really well with what our culture sees as successful. So they're very good at achieving any goal they might want to set and very good at setting a goal and then doing everything it takes to get to the goal. Also, they tend to have a big awareness of image. So they're very good at looking good too. So even if, things aren't going well, they may look like everything's going well because they have this sense of being able to identify with people, what people see as successful and become that. Now, of course, that's also not good for them because the blind spot for threes is sometimes their own, what we might call truer self, because when threes are very good at shape-shifting, at becoming whatever persona or image that might be seen as positive in a particular environment. But then when they do that, they lose touch with who they really are and what they really think, because if you see kind of tension between an ability to connect with others through shape-shifting and the other end of that tension being authenticity, sometimes threes lose track and don't really know who their authentic self is. Like if I can shape-shift into anything that people like, then who am I really? Right. And the way to learning who they really are is through getting in touch with their emotions. But often that feels threatening to threes because if I'm all about doing and achieving and meeting the goal, guess what? Emotions slow me down. And so there can be a way that that threes unconsciously avoid their own emotions when that's really the path to knowing more who they truly are, what they really want, how they really feel about things, what's really important to them. And of course, we can't really live life in a deeper way, like having deeper relationships, being more deeply successful, unless we know who we really are. And sometimes threes have a hard time finding that, especially in a US culture where their personality stuff is rewarded. And it's hard to give up those rewards, even think about giving up those rewards. Like, who will I be? And how will I support my family? How will I be in the world if I can't be this or, the CEO or the successful this or that?
Right. Okay. None of that hit home, by the way. Just kidding. All right. On to twos.
Twos. Okay. So twos are very good at being likable and friendly and charming and sort of making other people like them through different ways, different paths. Sometimes it's just being helpful and supportive and nice. And they're very good at working with others, like in a work setting. Twos see work through the lens of relationships. So it looks like a bunch of relationships to me, not necessarily like a bunch of tasks, which it might look like to other types. But the downside, the blind spot for twos is similar to nines, where we talked about how they're other referencing, they're looking outside themselves, so they don't always know what's going on the inside. Twos, even though they're emotional types, may sense more what other people are feeling and not know what they're feeling. And they may also not know what they need and have a hard time expressing that need or asking for help. It can feel very hard for twos to ask for help from others. It's sort of like, I'm the person who helps others. And also twos have a blind spot when they don't see that sometimes their help has strings attached. So I'm helping you. Actually, I have a strategy. That's a strategy to get something back from you. And sometimes twos don't admit that even to themselves.
Got it. And that was the example you gave us earlier, the leader, in addition to your type. So right. We got some bonuses on that one. And then our last one, the ones.
Type one. So ones, we're back to the body center, and ones are sometimes known as the perfectionist or the reformer. And ones are very good at sort of being responsible. They look at the world in terms of right and wrong, good and bad. And they also look at the world in terms of how things could be more perfect. So they're really good at improvement, and in organizations, they're very good at quality control. Like, how do we get the best possible outcome? And they have a very clear vision of what perfect or best or ideal is. And they can work extremely hard in improving things and making things as good as they can be. They're always improving themselves. They tend to be, they tend to have a focus on ethics and responsibility and doing the right thing. Now, the blind spot for them is that sometimes inside themselves, a lot of anger gets generated. There are 8s, 9s, and 1s are what we call anger types, but for ones, it's also one of their main kind of deeper issues is that anger gets generated by, for instance, that's often like, well, I'm following the rules. Why aren't you? I'm working super hard, but I look around and not everyone's working as hard as me. Now, part of their growth path is not working so hard and relaxing and having more fun. But anger can get generated when they sort of see themselves as following the rules or doing the right thing and others aren't. But then they can sometimes think that anger needs to be controlled. And they may not realize how much anger is driving what they do and is more visible to others and is acted out in their actions. And so it really helps them to own their anger and not see it as bad and learn to channel it more consciously.
That was good. It's only been 2 days. You got through all of that in less than 48 hours. Let's talk growth a little bit here. So folks that feel pretty strongly, okay, I know I'm a whatever. Now it becomes this dynamic tool where we can build off of. It's not just an identification. It's not just that's me. Okay, boom, I have a label I can absorb. It's an opportunity for growth. So once someone's identified their type, what's next? Like, what's the next step?
Yeah, that's the most important question.
Yes.
The Enneagram is absolutely not about just describing ourselves or our differences with others. It's about growth. That's what it's made for. And it has so much capacity to help us grow. And the what next is learning more about your type and your patterns, studying yourself. Like the method, one of the big methods behind the Enneagram is what we call self-observation. So sometimes when I used to be a psychotherapist and the person would say, well, what do I do now? I'd say, okay, between now and the next session, I want you to really observe your thoughts and your feelings and your behaviors in a whole new way, because I think sometimes we think we know ourselves or we know what we do, but when we actually really start paying better attention, we realize, wow, I'm doing certain things I didn't think I was doing, and I'm doing certain things that are getting me into more trouble than I thought they were getting into, and I'm avoiding certain things. So becoming really, really clear on, like, how am I actually behaving, and what is the impact of that, on me and on others? And so using it as a way of really almost studying yourself with a lot of conscious intention. And really, it's a little bit like in the beginning, and we shouldn't try to change things too quickly when we work with the Enneagram. That for a while in the beginning, it's a little bit like catching yourself in the act without criticizing yourself, a little bit like saying, oh, there I go again. Oh, there I go again. Like as a 2, one example I like to give is like, so it says in the book that we 2s have a hard time saying no, and we say yes to everything, and seems like I could say no if I wanted to. And then I watch myself and people will ask me for things, and in my head, I'm saying no, and my mouth is saying yes. Right. So I'm watching myself like, I want to say no. Everything in me wants to say no, and I'm saying yes. Right. And so recognizing, wow, I think that's an issue, and again, the key is it's really, really key to not criticize yourself for what you start seeing, because the tendency will be, oh, what I'm doing is bad. When I'm doing my personality stuff, that I need to stop doing that and do something else. And so the inner critic gets involved, which is not good, because that keeps us stuck in our personality, because our ego is designed to defend us. And so if one part of us is attacking ourselves, and the other part of ourselves is going to get stronger. Right. So we need to, with a lot of acceptance and a lot of non-judgment, we need to say, oh, there I go. Oh, I'm doing that thing again. There, I'm seeing it in action. So for a while, we need to study ourselves and see it in action without judging ourselves, because over time, that gives us even more ability to be conscious about what we're doing. And eventually it creates the foundation to be able to do things differently if we choose to.
And any cues that you've used, any reminders, obviously journaling would be a piece of that, but are there other things that you've utilized to have folks, I don't know, switch a rubber band from their left arm to their right arm each time they notice something? Or are there other things that, I'll just leave it open, other stuff?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all of those things, I think, like talking to a coach or a therapist helps, journaling helps, but also things like mantras and affirmations. Like for a while as a 2, I would start saying, like, what do I need right now? What do I need right now? What do I need today? And asking myself the question reminded me that I had to tune into that, because if I wasn't asking that question, it would sort of just drop off my radar screen. And I've heard a lot of different types having different kinds of mantras.
I was going to say, so that's a good 2 question. It's not a good necessarily question general.
Yes.
Perfect. Got it. That makes sense.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh man, I could talk about this stuff all day. This is so interesting. Let's wrap up with this. We'll have links to your research. No, two more things I want to cover. First of all, talk briefly about the training process that you have available for professionals. We know it. Susanna's been through it. It involves extensive training in the Enneagram and how to utilize that in not necessarily a clinical setting. She does as a counselor and a coach, but potentially could you give us the 10,000-foot view of why that's different from other Enneagram training methods? And then I just want you briefly to talk us through the whole Odyssey connection. So, because I'm personally very curious about that as I was looking at one of your presentations. So take it away.
Okay. So the first question, you may have to remind me, I'm thinking about the second question.
Yeah, of course, because that's the cool one. Just briefly about the certification and why it's specific more to clinicians, coaches who are looking for a training that would really apply to what they're doing for a living.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm unbiased, but I think the Enneagram is by far the most powerful tool for coaches and therapists. And I was a therapist and I used the Enneagram, so I know this. It helps you cut to the heart of the matter more quickly. It helps you get to know someone. You go farther faster in the process. Now, we have a certification program, a professional certification program where we train all kinds of people, therapists, spiritual directors, coaches, leaders in companies, organization development consultants, and even just people who are kind of trying to make a career transition. Now, we don't train people to be coaches or professionals, but we train people who already have kind of a path that they're on, how to be really proficient in the Enneagram, how to learn the Enneagram at a deep level so that you can integrate it into your professional practice, whatever that might be. And sometimes people don't realize that a lot of what's out there in the Enneagram world is a little bit more on the shallow side. It's a little bit more on the stereotypical side. And so we wanted to provide a program to train professionals who want to use the Enneagram as the powerful tool it is to really understand what it is and how to use it best and how to work with the different types, how to work with the subtypes. A lot of other approaches, for instance, don't use the subtype approach that we use. And so we find it's a little bit more of a blunt instrument when they use it. And we also teach a very specific learning about wings and arrow movements. Some people see wings as subtypes. We see wings as wings. And so we really help people develop skill and confidence to really use the Enneagram in an ethical, responsible, skillful way. We also have another side of our Enneagram Academy where we provide opportunities for people to have deep inner work experiences. So we sometimes say the professional certification is for outer impact, and the personal mastery program, which is our other side, is for inner transformation. But of course, they overlap because when you go through our professional certification program, it involves 2 professional workshops where it's really more teaching about the system, and then their person's required to go to one of our retreats, one of our 2 basic retreats, to have a more inner experience and to apply the Enneagram to themselves, because we think it's so important when people are working with the Enneagram that they're also using it with themselves in their own process, because that's the best learning about how to use the system.
Beautiful. And again, folks, we will have links to that. Susanna's been through that. She continues to dive deeper, and it's been incredibly valuable, both organizationally and personally. So now just give us I know you could talk this one for like a whole course, but the Odyssey, there's a connection between the Odyssey, the Journey, Ulysses, and the Enneagram. Can you give us just enough for us to walk away going, ooh, I want to read more about that?
Yeah. I mean, there's some debate about whether and what are the Enneagram's ancient origins and ancient teachings. I happen to think it derives from ancient traditions. But one piece of evidence I think we have of that is that, in the 6th century BC, we have the Odyssey and the Iliad, who are written by Homer. Now, we don't know whether Homer was a person or a group of people, but it's pretty clear that the Iliad and the Odyssey were the result for many, maybe hundreds of years, were stories told by these traveling bards or storytellers, and they kind of carried the core myths of those cultures. And the Odyssey happens to be a story about Odysseus, who is the one who thought up the Trojan horse and ended the Trojan Greek War. And then in the Odyssey, it's a story of homecoming, and a story of the metaphorical coming home to the true self, if you see it that way. And there's a lot of 3s also in the Odyssey, but one of the main part of the action comes in what's called the Great Wanderings, where he's traveling home to his home from the Greek War, and it's going to take a while. He has a ship, many ships and sailors. He's kind of a mini king in his own right. So he's sailing home, but on the way home, he gets waylaid in 9 different lands, where he has to kind of overcome trials and tribulations to move forward to get home. And he yearns to be home with his castle and his wife and his family and his son. And so he goes to these 9 lands. And if you look at the kind of characters he encounters there, the mythic characters, they have exactly the same character of the 9 Enneagram types. And he visits each land in order: 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And it's kind of amazing that, and to me, that's kind of some kind of evidence that the Enneagram is very old.
Wow. So fascinating. Dr. Chestnut, this was fun.
Really, really nice talking with you. It's been really fun.
Susanna has been talking about the amazing Dr. Beatrice Chestnut for years. What a pleasure to finally get to have this conversation. If you're new to the Catalyst 360 podcast, thank you for investing a few minutes of your week with us. We know you have literally over 1 million podcast options, and we're honored you decided to join us on this Catalyst journey. This is episode 293. So you have plenty of engaging evidence-based programs that are sitting there in the library if you're looking for more, including another Enneagram pioneer, Ian Morgan Cron, back on May 29th of 2023, if this wet your whistle for a little bit more on this topic. And now it's time to be a Catalyst. This is Catalyst Coaching 360's Dr. Brad Cooper. Make it a great rest of your week, and I'll speak with you soon on the next episode of the Catalyst 360 podcast. Or maybe over on the YouTube coaching channel. 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 Maybe over on the YouTube coaching